Good evening. As shadows deepen, prepare for tales that unsettle the soul. Listen closely, subtle sounds may signal horrors approaching. Settle in if you dare. Remember, the most chilling monsters lurk within your own mind. For deeper nightmares, join us on Patreon. The first whisper begins. Story 1. Part 2. Evening, everyone. I am back again with another story from my trucking adventures. ILL try to share as much information as I can about the places I go. But I really don't want anyone to cross paths with the things I've seen. So I am also trying to keep it vague. For anyone who is out of the loop, I suggest listening to my first 2 accounts. Otherwise, this may not make much sense. I really don't experience these things that often. But when I do, it can get pretty weird. Why does everything insist on coming out at night? Anyways, whatever happened to daytime monsters? Is everything paranormal nocturnal? Dose and tea make a lot of sense. If you ask me, I never thought I would have developed an aversion to beef. But my experience at this warehouse in Omaha has unfortunately left me with a rather bad experience with fresh meat. I am not a vegetarian by any means, but after this, I need to have my steak a little more well done than I liked before. Let me back up. This was a few weeks after my terrifying experience in the Rocky Mountains of Montana. Life was going as normally as it can as a trucker, and I just got a new load delivering from a beef distribution warehouse in Omaha going to eastern Tennessee. I normally don't deliver a lot of fresh foods, but it's not really that unusual. They usually save trips like that for TCU drivers, temperature-controlled units, and I just haul dry van, which means the normal 53 female trailers you probably always see, TCUS, are normally responsible for hauling things like milk and other foods that need to be kept cold anyway. I am on my way to this warehouse for a live load, to be loaded on site instead of picking up an already loaded trailer, which is normal for fresh foods. It's a routine pickup. I get their sign in, back into the dock, and wait to be loaded. Once they refinished, which takes about an hour, they knock on my door and hand me my paperwork. I should mention it's also pretty late at this point. Maybe 7 p.m. Not quite dark, but the sun is setting. I pull out from the dock and hop out to close my trailer doors and place the seal on it. As I walk to the back, I give the cargo a quick once-over to make sure it's loaded properly. And isn't tea going to come crashing down when I take off? It seems to be in order. There's several pallets stacked high with plain white boxes labeled with with whatever is inside them, which I assume is beef or steaks. As I go to shut the doors, a box I must have not noticed before slips and tumbles to the trailer floor. Obviously it was crooked and came loose. It is not my job to stack the cargo properly. But this is far too simple to trouble the employees. So I climb into the trailer to see if I can put it in a more secure spot. I pick up the box and look at it, and I freeze one end of the box came partially open when it fell, and I saw the contents of the box. It wasn't tea beef. Inside the box, frozen, vacuum sealed, and neatly severed, was a human hand. Several human hands, all stuffed into the box and clearly packaged for sale. I had no idea what to think. This couldn't possibly be an accident. It is obviously packaged up. I looked at the label on the box, and it read left extremities, Caucasian, and the date it was packaged, which was today. Yeah, no way this was an accident. I checked all the other boxes. They were all full of human body parts. The labels said things like cranium and kidney. I was too scared to confront the employees about this. What if they were in on it? Maybe they had no idea what was in these boxes. But come on, I told myself. They transport these crates all day. They have to know exactly what they say. I decided to close the box and shove it back into the space where it fell from. Once I was miles away from this place, I'd call in an anonymous tip to the police about suspicious activity at this warehouse and never come back here. I jumped down from the trailer and slammed the doors shut, placing the seal on the handles. Everything okay? The voice startled me so much. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I turned around to see the same guy who handed me my papers standing there with a grimace on his face. He knew I knew, and I knew he knew I knew. I tried to play it cool. Oh, yeah, no, I am good. A box just fell, but I secured it, so we were all good to go. I said a little too cheerfully. The man kept intense eye contact with me the whole time. Well, he continued, have a safe trip. He tipped his hat at me, then walked away. That was weird. I thought to myself, I am not sure what the guy's deal was, but he definitely knew something was up. I am so calling the cops on this place. How beep up is that? It must have been some sort of black market operations. After I got the beep out of Dodge, I sent in an anonymous tip to the police, giving them the exact name and address of the place I went to, and telling them I was certain I saw human body parts being sold there. They thanked me, told me they would check it out, and then hung up. When I delivered the load, it was to a small, very dodgy-looking mom and pop operation. I dropped the trailer and hightailed it out of there As for the police, I wasn't sure if I was going to hear back from them about it. But about a week later, I decided to call and ask them. I'll never forget what they told me. They told me they searched the premises and found nothing. Absolutely nothing. The place was abandoned. There was no one there. No evidence that any sort of business had ever been operating there. Not a single piece of identifiable evidence could be found. No security tapes, no leftover packaging or paperwork. Just an empty warehouse. I was completely speechless. I thanked the officer I spoke to and hung up. I thought about telling them that I had paperwork from my delivery with their information on it. But since I called it in anonymously, I didn't want to be connected to any police files. I looked at the paperwork from that trip. I am required to keep all my bills in order to be paid. And the address for the billing was some location in North Dakota. They were smart enough to use a different billing location. Well, that was a dead end. But I also reported the place I delivered it to. No way those people didn't know what they were buying. I called back several times over the next few weeks, and the officer always told me he couldn't discuss an open case. At least that one was being investigated. I didn't think there was anything else I could do about this. As long as I never had to go back there, I didn't really care. It seemed to be mostly taken care of. That one beeped me up for a while. I'd seen some weird beep, but this was such a different kind of scary. I think people, myself included, tend to forget how real and deadly the black market and human trafficking can be. I don't pretend to know everything about it. Quite the opposite. This experience just made me realize you never know how close you are to this type of thing. Be vigilant, guys. You never know what could happen. Don't go alone, especially at night. Trust your instincts. If a situation feels off, get the beep out of there. Don't be afraid to kick and scream and raise beep. Do anything to save your life. Try to always carry protection. A pocket knife will do in a pinch. Just be safe, everyone. I hate for anyone else to end up as just a box of frozen hands in a trailer. Until next time, this is Brittany signing off. B. Story 2. I was never a heavy addict or anything. Never did beep or beep. Tried crack cocaine once. That was but I was only sober for 8 months between that and when Eddie, an old buddy of mine, introduced me to something called K3. Against my better judgment, I took him up on the offer. You heard of K2, bro, he said. He was already high. Spice, Synthetic beep. Well, listen, man. I blinked. I looked at our mutual friend, Todd, Listen what? What? You said, well, listen, man. And then you spaced out. Oh, what were we talking about? K3. Oh, right. You heard of K2? Yes. I just said that. He leaned in close. Well, listen, man. This beep is like K2, and then some. Hence the name K4. I thought you said it was K3. Todd stepped in. Okay. Ignore him. He has gone. This isn't synthetic anything. Kev. It has something new. Then, why did he call it K4? K3. Then, why did he call it K3? He calls it that cause the high reminds him of Bane on Spice. Or something. But this beep is like, on another level. And it ain't cannabinoid nothing. I shifted in my seat. Okay. I am not. I mean, you remember what happened last year. Yeah, no. I got you. Listen. Though I've done this beep 4 times already. Haven T had one bad trip yet. First trip I was just like, high off my beep. Nothing made sense. Second trip I was like an astronaut, bro. I think I saw what exists outside the universe. Okay. What exists outside the universe? I said I saw it. Not that I remember it. But it was wild. I was warming up to the idea. How long does the high last? Depends on the hit. And the quality. He held up a small bag of pills. And you know me, man. I only get the best. Muffin, his dog, growled from the other side of the room. Muffin. Hey. Down, girl. Is she okay? She is fine, dude, he said. She is fine, dude, echoed Eddie. Then he started laughing. Is he on this stuff now? Took it right before you got here. I wanted someone to be sober enough to explain it to you. Thanks. Thank yourself, person. You blittering snarch, Eddie said. Then he resumed laughing. Thanks, Ed. Todd popped his pill in his mouth. I did the same. After a moment, he said, How you feeling? Me. Fine. How long does it take to kick in? He smiled. Should be feeling it momentarily, my dude. Muffin started growling again. Todd clapped once. Muffin. Shush, girl. Come on. I looked at her. She was standing in her crate, baring teeth. The hair on her back stood on end. I don't think she is okay, man. She is fine. Ed, you good? I looked. Eddie was face down in the cushions of the couch. He wasn't laughing anymore. He was shivering, I said. Are we gonna get cold or something? I usually don tea, Todd said. Every hit is different. And every person is different. All I know is, it is beep fun. Okay. Ed, didn't he look like he was having much fun? He doesn't he look like he is having much fun? I said, yeah, well, you know how your friends can be, sweetie. said my mom. I know, Mom. What? I said, I know, Mom. I am not your mother, said Pastor Lewis. Oh, I said. Sorry. He leaned in from where Todd had been. He looked concerned, disappointed, had his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped between them. Kevin, you know you shouldn't be doing this. I know. Especially after what happened last year. What were you thinking? Thought I could handle it, I guess. I stared at the floor, the way the colors on the carpet swirled in and out was always so mesmerizing. It's going to be a bad trip, you know. I looked up. Pastor Lewis had on that old evil smile he always had. Or did he? I furrowed my brow. What? It's going to be a bad trip, he said again, in a deeper voice. Todd said all the trips he had were fun. That doesn't mean it's impossible to have a bad one. Oh, Pastor Lewis doesn't sound like that. Man, who the beep is Pastor Lewis, said Pastor Lewis. In Todd's voice I blinked. Todd was sitting there, looking at me like I'd lost my mind. I cleared my throat, but couldn't he feel it? My old youth pastor from back in the day. I said. Muffin barked from her kennel. It was a deafening, alien-sounding bark. Gravelly, dark. I looked over at her. She looked at me. She barked again. But this time, didn't he open her snout to do so? Whoa, I said. What? Said Todd. He was crawling on the ceiling, looking down at me in a way that should be broken his neck. Cool how your dog can bark without moving her mouth. Can you sit down? You're weirding me out. Yeah, sorry, Pastor Lewis said, before sitting down and becoming Todd. Then Todd said, laughing hysterically, I am sitting, man. He was indeed sitting. I looked up, nobody on the ceiling, and no indication that anyone had been. He was doubled over with laughter, howling, aching laughs. He held his stomach. Is it that funny? It ain't that, Todd said. The spiders in your ears are singing. I smiled. Oh yeah, what are they singing? Todd couldn't stop laughing long enough to respond. But he didn't need to. I could hear it too. Dude, I said. It's the song from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Todd laughed even harder. Man, what? What? You spelled it wrong, my dude. What? Go back. You spelled dwarves wrong. It should be dwarves, not dwavers. What the beep is a dwaver? I scrolled up. There it was. Dwavers. Huh. That's weird. Huh. That's weird. Todd was still laughing, far harder and longer than the situation warranted. How am I seeing words I spoke? I asked. I grabbed at the R in dwavers so I could rearrange the word. But the R slapped me just as Muffin barked again. Bark smack. Just like that. A single bark. Sounded like Satan. I sat back down. Easy there, Dwavers, I said. ILL, just spell it. Right next time, beep. Make sure you do, said Muffin. One by one. The letters comprising the word, Dwavers, headed out the kitchen window. Dude. I said. Todd, the letters are escaping. Stop the letters. Stop the letters. I can't hear you, bro, said Todd in Pastor Lewis' voice, or Pastor Lewis in Todd's voice. Who were they again? Beep. Whoever it was said, come downstairs. I am downstairs, I said, before stubbing my toe on his bedroom dresser. I took a step back. I was in his bedroom upstairs. Place was a wreck. That wait. How did I? Come downstairs, said Muffin, demonically. I couldn't see her. But somehow I just knew she was standing at the bottom of the stairs, on two legs, with her head upside down. You know when you just know a dog will look like that. It was one of those times. That's okay, I said. I like it up here. I pulled one of his dresser drawers out, dumped out all his underwear and condoms, and put it on my head for protection. No way you re-getting me now, you beep. I sat down on his bed, but his bed was on the other end of the room. Oh, I said, sitting on his floor. Hurt my beep. Go downstairs, said Muffin. From so close behind me, she must have been inside my head. Get out of my head, I said. The power of the dresser drawer compels you. He was crawling on the ceiling, looking down at me in a way that should be broken his neck. Hey, he was crawling on the ceiling, looking down at me in a way that should be broken his neck. Stop it. He was crawling on the ceiling, looking down at me in a way that should be broken his neck. Stop repeating that sentence. What sentence? Said Todd. He was in his room. At least, I think he was. I don't know, man. I blinked again. He wasn't there. I could hear him laughing downstairs, hysterically. Holy beep, I could hear myself say. I sounded distant, underwater. I am not in control right now. I started crawling towards the hallway, and he was crawling on the ceiling, looking down at me in a way that should be broken his eye, shoved the sentence aside. The letters crashed into the wall and melted. I kept crawling, but now my hands were getting stuck in the quicksand. Beep, I said. Here we go. I made it to the door, but the dresser drawer on my head was too wide. I turned it the other way, the only possible solution to that problem, and went for the stairs. Downstairs, Eddie up and about yet again, was approaching Muffin-'s kennel, bent over, walking unnaturally, wide-eyed, mouth open, out out of his mind. Muffin was howling and barking hysterically, but also silently. "That 's weird," I said. "It's gonna be a bad trip," said Pastor Lewis. "You already said that, Pastor Lewis." "I am asking why I can't hear Muffin bark." "It's gonna be a bad trip," he said again. He was crawling on the ceiling, looking down at me in a way that should be broken his neck. "Why is everything repeating?" I asked aloud. He was crawling on the ceiling, looking down at me in a way that should be broken his neck. "Why is everything repeating?" I asked aloud. "Drink, drink, water, water, bro, bro," said Todd, Todd. He handed me a glass. And an I tried to drink it. Upside down the water, spilled into the swirling vortex that was his floor. "Oh man," I said, "I lost the water." "Where did you have it last, sweetie?" said Mom. I looked at the empty glass. "I can't remember." "Hey, Roy Rogers, what did I do with my water, man? Did I eat it?" Roy Rogers didn't respond. He was too busy floating on an upside-down chair that was attached to the ceiling. "Snarch," said his chair. Roy Rogers, who was also my Uncle Mo, tipped his hat. "Let me know if you find it," I said. I could be sworn I had it. Bark. It's gonna be a bad trip, you know. Why am I just now hearing Muffin barking? That was like an hour ago. I looked over. Eddie had picked up her kennel with her still inside and was holding it above his head. She was consumed in absolute and utter panic, and he was trying to eat the entire crate. He unhinged his jaw to fit it inside, revealing exactly 14,543 razor-sharp teeth, the size of railroad spikes. Bark. "Ed, stop," I heard myself say. I said. I squeezed my eyes shut and shook my head. "Ed, stop," I heard myself say. Why? His face was static, like when you turn your TV to a channel you don't own. "Ed, put her down and get that static off your face." He was crawling on the ceiling, looking down at me in a way that should be broken his neck. "What?" Eddie said. He dropped the kennel. Muffin yelped. "I don't know, man," I said. "Your face is all statusy, like when you turn your TV to a channel you don't own." "My face is static," Eddie said through the static. He started clawing at it. "And who's crawling on the ceiling, looking down at you in a way that should be broken his neck?" That sentence seemed out of place. I heard the words, but didn't see them coming from Eddie's mouth. In fact, Eddie wasn't even standing there anymore. He was in the kitchen, getting a knife beep. It's gonna be a bad trip, you know. Shut up, Pastor Lewis. I know that now. Eddie started swiping the knife in front of his face. Get off me, Static, he said. Get off me, Static. I put the knife down. Ed, stand up. Wait. No. I stood up. Eddie knifed. Putting the said down, damn it, I stood up. Ed, put the knife down. There we go. It's gonna be a bad trip, you know. I turned around. Pastor Lewis was at the top of the stairs. But it wasn't he, Pastor Lewis. It was a perfectly black figure. Pastor Lewis, black is slimming on you. Come upstairs, said the figure. It didn't sound like Pastor Lewis anymore, but it did sound like static, almost as if the static had formed itself into words. I can't. I have to save my friend from the static knife. Come upstairs, said the figure. Come upstairs. Come upstairs. Come upstairs. Come upstairs. Come upstairs. Come upstairs subcom. Stairs. Stairs. Ceilings. Ceilings. He was crawling on the ceiling, looking down at me in a way that should be broken his neck. 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 Narc. Narc. Bark. Bark. B-A-R-K, 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 B-A-R-K-G-E-T. Off me. Static. S-T-A-T-I-I-I-I-I-I-C. Stat. I see. Stat. I see. Yo. Who the beep is Pastor Lewis? He was crawling on the ceiling, looking down at me in a way that should be broken his neck. Com E-ups T-A-I-R-S D-W-A-V-R-E-S. Sweetie, it's gonna be a bad trip. You know, no, N-O-O-O-O-O-O-O. I was falling. I realized. Falling, falling, falling. And it was hot. Wherever this endless tunnel was, it was dark and hot. That's a bad combination, usually. Isn't beep. I haven't been in many dark and hot places, but having experienced it, I can say I'd much rather be in bright, cool places. Help me, I said. I felt asphalt. Help me. I am falling. Now I saw lights coming on from the side of the pit. Come upstairs, said a single voice from behind me that was also Todd. Pastor Lewis, Eddie, and my mother at once. This isn't a bad trip, Kevin, the voice continued. It's real, and you know that. What you thought was real was the trip. Time, space, those are illusions. This is what exists behind the veil. This is the nothingness that exists outside the universe. This is the nothingness that awaits you at the end. No. Falling. Get him to his feet. Come upstairs and get that thing off his head. Come upstairs. Join the static. 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 Bark. Are you okay? I blinked. Hey, kid, said the officer. You okay? I looked around. I was lying in the street. Concerned neighbors. Police cars everywhere. Most were in front of Eddie S. house. Muffin whimpered in her crate next to me. W what? What happened? Will you be out here screaming, I am falling? I am falling, no. With a dog kennel, a dresser drawer on your head, and no shoes. I was hoping you'd tell me. I think I was saving Muffin, I said. Who's Muffin? The dog. Yeah. Saving her from what? My friend was going to beep her, I think. Then he tried to cut his face off, because it was all static. Holy beep. My now sober brain processed unsober words. Holy beep. That stuff was insane. Yeah. I say that as a fair assessment, beep. You were lucky. You didn't jump off the roof. Can you stand? The officer helped me to my feet. I stumbled towards his car. Wait, I said. What happened to Todd and Eddie? Are they okay? He looked at me. No, kid. They were not okay. This is why you don't beep with this stuff. Now, we have to clean up what is left. Sit there. He went off to talk to the other officers. And the paramedics beep. Paramedics. 2 gurneys. Ambulance. I came to a full 36 hours later. In my own betas, I later found out. Eddie did succeed in getting the static off of his face, along with the rest of his face, and the last I heard of Todd, he was in a straitjacket. Muffin was given to the shelter, and then to another family. So there is some good news, at least as for myself. I was told the effects might never wear off. I didn't believe them at first. I mean, who would? And how do you even process that kind of news? Beep. I don't know. All I know is that the black figure is still standing at the end of my hallway, asking me to join it. I can still hear static. Story 3. The first thing Ellis noticed was the silence of the gulls, perched high in the lantern room of the Sentinel Point Lighthouse. He'd grown, accustomed to their raucous symphony, the shrieks, the squabbles, the ceaseless commentary on the churning gray Atlantic below. But that morning, as he wiped condensation from the thick glass panes, the cliffs were mute, only the relentless sigh of the waves against the rocks. A sound as constant as his own heartbeat remained. An unsettling quietude settled over the isolated promontory, thick as the sea fog that sometimes swallowed the world whole. Ellis was the latest in a long, unbroken line of keepers for Sentinel Point. A job that attracted the solitary, the world-weary, or those simply running out of places to hide. He fell into the latter category. The lighthouse wasn't just a job. It was a refuge carved from granite and salt spray. His predecessor, Old Man Harker, had vanished 6 months prior. Search parties found nothing but a cold mug of tea on the kitchen table, and the logbook open to an entry scrawled in shaky script. The stars are wrong tonight. It watches from the deep, dismissed as the ramblings of a lonely man succumbing to dementia. The case was closed, Ellis needing the isolation and the steady paycheck. Hadn't he dwelled on it? Now, standing in the unnatural silence, Harker S. words echoed in his mind like a cold draft through a cracked window. The unease began subtly, insidiously. Ellis would find his meticulously organized tools, wrenches, oil cans, cleaning rags rearranged when he returned after a brief trip upstairs. Not thrown about, but placed. A wrench balanced precariously on the edge of the workbench. Oil cans stacked in a pyramid. He'd never build. He blamed fatigue, the monotony playing tricks on his mind. Then came the smells. Not the expected tang of salt and ozone, but a deeper, older scent, brine mixed with the coppery tang of something long submerged. And beneath it all, a faint, sickly sweetness, like rotting kelp, dredged from abyssal trenches. It would waft through the lower rooms, strongest near the heavy, iron-bound door leading down to the old cistern chamber, a space unused for decades. Its entrance sealed with rusted bolts. Ellis had no intention of touching. Sleep became fractured. He'd wake with a jolt. Certain he'd heard a sound, not the wind or the waves, but a dragging noise, like something heavy and wet being pulled across the flagstone floor of the watchroom below. He'd lie rigid in his narrow bunk, heart hammering against his ribs, straining to hear over the thunder of his own pulse. Silence would answer, profound and mocking. Yet, descending the spiral stone staircase the next morning, he'd sometimes find faint, damp patches on the cold stone, irregular, smeared shapes that evaporated quickly in the chill air, leaving only a lingering chill and the phantom scent of the deep one evening. While painstakingly polishing the massive Fresnel lens, Ellis caught a flicker in the glass, not a reflection of the setting sun bleeding orange across the water, but something within the intricate prisms themselves, a shape vast and indistinct, coiling in the depths of the glass like smoke trapped in amber. He recoiled, blinking hard. When he looked again, it was gone, leaving only the distorted reflection of his own pale, wide-eyed face. He chalked it up to eye strain. The play of light on the meticulously cut glass, but the image lingered a sense of impossible scale, of limbs or tendrils that defied articulation, of a single, cold eye the size of a dinner plate, regarding him from an impossible distance. The silence deepened. The radio, his only lifeline to the mainland, began to spit static at unpredictable intervals. Voices would dissolve into guttural, wet clicks and groans that sounded disturbingly organic, as if transmitted from a throat choked with seawater. The weather reports became nonsensical, forecasting impossible pressures, temperatures plummeting to depths found only in ocean trenches. Ellis stopped relying on it, the static itself becoming a source of dread. The temperature inside the lighthouse began to drop. A cold that seeped from the stones themselves. Unaffected by the roaring fire, he kept in the small living quarters stove. His breath plumed in the air, even during the day. Frost patterns, intricate and alien, bloomed on the insides of the windows, not depicting familiar ferns or feathers, but spiraling geometries that hurt his eyes to follow, suggesting impossible angles and depths. He de-scraped them off, only for them to reappear overnight, denser. More complex then came the time slips. Ellis would be reading by the fire, glance at his watch, and realize 2 hours had vanished without memory. He'd find himself standing at the sealed cistern door, his hand resting on the cold, rusted iron. No recollection of walking there. Once he woke slumped against the thick glass of the lantern room, his cheek pressed against the freezing pane, staring out at a night sky where the stars were in tea, merely obscured by cloud, but absent, utter velvet blackness pressed against the glass, broken only by the faint, sickly phosphorescence of the waves far below. In that absolute dark, he felt a pressure, a vast, unseen presence just beyond the fragile barrier of the glass, observing him with an ancient, indifferent hunger. Panic seized him, cold and sharp. He scrambled back, fumbling for the light controls, when the powerful beam finally sliced through the dark. It revealed only the familiar, storm-tossed sea, but the sense of being watched, of being known by something utterly alien, remained. A cold stone in his gut he tried to leave, packed a small bag one gray dawn, resolved to walk the 5 miles to the nearest hamlet. Consequences be damned. He reached the heavy wooden door at the base of the tower, the one leading out onto the wind-scoured path. As his hand touched the cold iron latch, a wave of pure, paralyzing terror washed over him. It wasn't fear of the elements or the isolation. It was the absolute, bone-deep certainty that the moment he stepped outside the lighthouse's protective stone shell, it would have him, the vast, unseen thing that dwelled in the deep, that watched from the distorted glass, and the frozen spirals on the windows, that stole time and left damp trails on the floor. The lighthouse wasn't just his refuge. It was his cage, and the entity was the warden. He sank to his knees, trembling, the bag slipping from nerveless fingers. Escape was an illusion. Sentinel Point held him. Now the manifestations escalated. The dragging sounds became louder, more frequent, accompanied by a low, subsonic vibration that hummed in his bones and rattled his teeth. Objects began to move with purpose. A heavy brass lamp sailed across the room, shattering against the stone wall. His logbook flipped open by itself, the pages filling not with his neat script, but with frantic, overlapping scrawls in a dozen different hands. Some he recognized as Harker S. shaky script. Others were utterly alien, written in spirals or jagged glyphs that pulsed faintly on the page. They spoke of the deep dweller, the watcher from below, an entity older than the seafloor itself, that hungered not for flesh, but for awareness, for the fragile spark of human consciousness. It collected keepers, the log implied, absorbed them into its timeless, crushing vastness. It doesn't kill, one frantic entry read. It consumes. It folds you into the dark, behind the stars the cold, intensified, until his breath crackled in the air. Frost coated the inside walls. The intricate patterns now forming undeniable shapes. Vast, tentacled shadows, cyclopean eyes, and worst of all, distorted, screaming human faces, frozen in eternal terror faces Ellis recognized from old photographs of past keepers, including Harker. Their silent screams echoed in the frigid silence. The final horror struck in the lantern room. Ellis, driven by a desperate, morbid compulsion, was polishing the Fresnel lens again. The storm outside raged, waves exploding against the cliffs like artillery fire. The powerful beam cut through the lashing rain and spray as he leaned close, buffing a stubborn smudge. His own reflection in the multifaceted glass suddenly shifted. It wasn't him staring back. The eyes were huge, black, and depthless, like obsidian pools reflecting no light. The mouth stretched into a rictus grin far too wide for the face, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. And behind this monstrous visage, coiling in the infinite depths of the glass, was the vast, shadowy outline of the thing itself, a leviathan shape of impossible biology, all grasping limbs and pulsating, bioluminescent nodes, dwarfing the lighthouse, dwarfing the very oceanate Wasantee outside. It wasn't he watching through the glass. It was in the glass, in the lens, and his reflection was its doorway. He screamed, staggering back. But the image held him. The Ellis thing in the glass raised a hand, ending in long, boneless fingers slick with dark ichor. It pressed its palm against the inside of the lens, against his side of the glass. Ellis felt an answering, impossible pressure against his own chest, cold and wet, as if an unseen, viscous limb was pressing through from the reflection. The scent of deep brine and decay flooded his nostrils. Thick enough to choke on the lighthouse beam flickered violently, then died. Utter darkness swallowed the lantern room, broken only by the faint, sickly glow emanating from the monstrous reflection in the lens. Ellis couldn't he move. Terror had frozen him solid, colder than the encroaching frost. He could only stare into those bottomless black eyes, eyes that held the chill of the abyss and the weight of geological epochs. A sound filled the darkness, not the storm, but a low, wet susurration, like 1,000 voices whispering from a drowned cathedral. It wasn't a language, but a feeling, a crushing sense of infinite age and indifference, pressing in on his mind. He understood then, with a clarity that shattered his sanity. Harker hadn't he vanished. He was here. They all were, absorbed, consumed, their awareness trapped forever within the crushing, timeless dark of the deep dweller. The lighthouse wasn't a warning beacon. It was a lure, a fixed point in the vastness that the entity used to anchor itself, to draw its chosen observers close. Keepers weren't caretakers, they were sustenance, and the slow, insidious manifestations, they weren't just hauntings. They were the process of digestion. The entity was savoring his terror, his dawning realization, folding his fragile human consciousness into its own vast, alien mind. The pressure against his chest increased. He felt a terrible, icy wetness seeping through his sweater, not water, but something thicker, more primal. He tried to scream again, but his throat filled with the taste of salt and cold, deep ocean mud. The whispering grew louder, resolving not into words, but into a single, crushing thought that wasn't his own, projected into the crumbling ruins of his mind. See, feel, be known, be folded. Welcome to the deep, Keeper Ellis. The light goes out. The watch is done outside. The storm raged on, indifferent. The Sentinel Point lighthouse stood dark against the howling night. Below, in the sealed cistern chamber, no one had entered for decades. The rusted bolts began to weep dark, viscous fluid, and high in the extinguished lantern room, the Fresnel lens, now cold and dark, held within its intricate prisms the faint, fading afterimage of a man's terrified face, slowly dissolving into the vast, coiling shadow that filled the glass from edge to edge. The silence of the gulls was now absolute. The only sound was the endless sigh of the sea, and the low, wet whisper echoing from the lightless tower, waiting for the next keeper to arrive. Story 4. The first flicker was so brief I blamed the bulb. That hallway light outside my apartment door had been temperamental for months, but when it stuttered again, as I fumbled with my keys, a cold finger traced my spine. It wasn't just the light dimming. The shadows in the corridor seemed to thicken, pooling like spilled ink around the baseboards. I shook my head hard, the familiar pressure building behind my eyes, the precursor to one of my migraines. Just a migraine. That's what I told myself as I slammed the door shut, locking it with trembling fingers, then sliding the deadbolt and chain for good measure my apartment, usually a sanctuary of worn leather and paperback clutter, felt different, smaller. The air hung heavy and still, tasting faintly metallic, like old blood on the tongue. The city sounds outside the comforting symphony of distant sirens and late-night traffic were muffled, replaced by a low, persistent hum that vibrated in my molars. I poured a glass of water. My reflection in the dark kitchen window catching me off guard. My eyes looked sunken, haunted. You were just tired, Leo. Overworked. My therapist's voice echoed in my head. Brittle and unconvincing. Dr. Aris had been suggesting stress leave for weeks. Maybe she was right. Sleep offered no refuge. Dreams were fractured mosaics of childhood memories, the smell of damp earth, the rough bark of the oak tree in our backyard, and the feeling of being watched from the dense woods beyond the fence. Always watched. I'd wake gasping, convinced I'd heard whispering right beside the bed. Just the radiator. I'd rationalize, clutching the sheets. Just the settling of the old building that whispers. Didn't he stop when I was awake? They started as indistinct murmurs beneath the hum, like distant radio static tuned between stations. Then one Tuesday morning, standing bleary-eyed before the bathroom mirror, I heard my name. Leo. A rasp, dry as autumn leaves scraped across concrete. It came from behind me. I spun, heart hammering against my ribs. Nothing, just the empty doorway, the pale morning light filtering through the cheap plastic blinds. Paranoia, Dr. Aris would say. Auditory hallucinations. Under stress, but the feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a physical pressure, a gaze like cold breath on the back of my neck. I found myself constantly scanning corners, peering behind doors, checking the locks repeatedly. I canceled plans with friends. Sarah's cheerful voice on the phone sounded suspiciously bright, laced with pity, or something else. Did she know? Know what? The question looped endlessly. My emails piled up unanswered. The outside world felt alien, threatening. My apartment became my entire universe, and it was shrinking. The distortions began subtly. Patterns on the wallpaper seemed to writhe if I stared too long. The face of the man on the cereal box seemed to leer, his eyes following me across the kitchen. Then came the tactile hallucinations, a cold hand brushing my arm when I reached for a book, damp footprints appearing on the clean bathroom tiles, vanishing before I could truly focus. My reflection started behaving strangely, sometimes just for a fraction of a second. The eyes would be wrong, too dark, too knowing, or the mouth would twitch into a smile I wasn't tea-making. I stopped trusting my senses. Was that coffee really boiling over? Or was the smell of burning just another phantom? Was the phone ringing? Or was the shrill tone only inside my skull? Reality felt like thin ice cracking beneath my feet. The migraines worsened, splitting my skull with shards of white-hot pain, often accompanied by flashes of imagery. A dark shape moving through trees, the glint of something metallic buried in dirt. The paranoia focused inward. Had I done something, forgotten something terrible? Fragments of memory surfaced, disjointed and unsettling. My 7th birthday party, the backyard, hide and seek. The woods were off limits, Mom always said, but the best hiding spots were just inside the tree line, near the old well. My friend Timmy dared me. Bet you won't go near it, Leo. Scaredy cat I remembered the crumbling stone lip, the gaping black mouth smelling of damp and decay. I remembered leaning over, and then nothing, a blank spot. Timmy moved away abruptly that summer. His parents never said why the whispers grew louder, coalescing into fragmented sentences. Remember the well, you looked, you saw. He S, still down there, who? Timmy. No, that was ridiculous. Timmy moved. He was fine. Wasn't he? One rain-lashed night, the power went out. The oppressive silence was worse than the hum. I huddled on the couch, a single candle flickering wildly, casting monstrous, dancing shadows on the walls. The whispers were a chorus now, overlapping, insistent. Look, Leo, look in the corner. My gaze was dragged, against my will, to the darkest corner of the living room, near the antique wardrobe. My grandmother left me. A deeper darkness coalesced there, not just an absence of light, but a presence, a man-shaped shadow, impossibly tall and thin, seemed to detach itself from the gloom. It had no discernible features, just an outline that drank the candlelight. My breath hitched, frozen in my throat. This wasn't a trick of the light. This wasn't a migraine aura. This thing radiated a palpable, bone-deep cold. a sense of profound, ancient malice. Didn't he move? It just watched. The pressure of its gaze was unbearable, crushing. The whispers ceased, replaced by a silent, screaming tension. I couldn't look away. My mind fractured. Was this madness? The final breakdown Dr. Eris had warned about, or had something always been there, waiting in the shadows of my life, of my memory, driven by a terror beyond reason? I scrambled backwards off the couch, knocking the candle over. It guttered out, plunging the room into absolute darkness. Panic seized me, pure and animal. I scrambled on hands and knees, desperate for the hallway, for the front door, for any escape. My hand brushed against something cold, and smooth the photo album tucked under the coffee table. The one eye hadn't opened in years blindly. I fumbled it open, tearing at the plastic sheets. I didn't need light. The image was seared into my memory. But I needed to see it, to prove the Shadow Man wrong. My 7th birthday, me grinning with a gap-toothed smile, holding a baseball glove, Timmy beside me, arms slung over my shoulder, and there, just visible in the background, near the edge of the woods, partially obscured by the oak tree, a figure, tall, impossibly thin, watching, just like the shadow in the corner, an adult. But the shape it was wrong, uncannily familiar to the form. Now, inhabiting my living room, a choked sob escaped me. It wasn't an adult. Looking closer in my mind's eye, the proportions were childlike, but stretched, distorted, and the face blurred in the old photo. But in the terrifying clarity of my fractured memory, superimposed over the shadow in the corner, I saw it. Not Timmy's face, it was mine, my 7-year-old face, but stretched over that impossibly tall, thin frame, eyes wide, not with childish joy, but with a terrifying, hollow emptiness, a face frozen in a silent scream, or perhaps a predatory grin. The whispers returned, not from the corner, but from inside my own skull, spoken in the rasping voice of a child that was me and wasn't me. You pushed him, Leo. You pushed Timmy into the well because he saw me. Because he saw what you really are. What you let in when you looked into the dark. The memory exploded, not as a recollection, but as a visceral reliving. The crumbling stone, Timmy's taunting grin, the surge of inexplicable, white-hot rage, my small hands shoving him hard, his scream cut short by a terrible wet thud from the blackness below, the silence afterward, the feeling of being watched not from the woods, but from within me, the shadow that had seeped into my soul at the moment of murder, feeding on the guilt, the terror, the buried secret. The Shadow Man in the corner shifted. It wasn't a separate entity. It was the manifestation, of that corrupted piece of my childhood self. The monstrousness ID buried with Timmy. It had been with me all along, growing in the dark corners of my mind, feeding on my sanity, waiting for the walls between denial and truth to crumble. The deadbolt clicked open, not by my hand. The chain rattled and slid free. The front door groaned open a few inches, revealing the flickering, dying light of the hallway. An invitation, a command. The shadow man, didn't he move towards the door? It moved towards me. Its form seemed to flow across the floor, silent and inevitable. The cold intensified, stealing my breath. The childish whisper inside me rose to a shriek, triumphant and hungry. Now we go back. Back to the well. Back to where it began. Where you belong, I scrambled backwards, pressing myself against the cold wall, trapped between peeling wallpaper and the advancing darkness, wearing my stolen face. The flickering hallway light cast long, dancing fingers into the room, illuminating the dust motes, swirling like frantic insects. The open door offered escape into the uncertain world outside. But the true horror wasn't out there. It was inside this shrinking room. It was inside me, wearing the face of the child I murdered, and the monster I became. The shadow reached out, not with hands, but with tendrils of pure, suffocating dread. It didn't need to touch me. It was me, and as the last vestige of Leo dissolved into the screaming void within, the only thought left, echoing in the hollow space where my mind used to be, was a terrified realization. The running never stopped. The 7-year-old who pushed Timmy into the dark had been running from the shadow ever since, and now, finally, it had caught up. The door to the apartment stood open. The hallway light flickered one last time, then died. In the perfect, suffocating darkness, filled only by the rasping whisper of my own stolen breath, I understood. I wasn't escaping. I was going home, to the well, to the dark, to the thing that had been waiting inside me all along, and somewhere, deep in the collapsing labyrinth of what used to be my mind, the terrified child was still running. Story 5. The first sign was the smell, not the usual stale beer and old pizza crusts that haunted Ben S. cramped studio apartment, but something deeper, older. It clung to the back of his throat like damp earth and rotting fruit, faint but persistent, arriving one Tuesday evening as he microwaved leftover spaghetti. He dismissed it, maybe misses. Gable down, the hall was trying another exotic recipe, or the ancient building S-pipes were protesting again. Then came the cold spots, not just drafts from the rattling window frame overlooking the grimy alley, but pockets of frigid air that seemed to coalesce, lingering like invisible voids. He'd be reading on the worn sofa, the radiator clanking valiantly, and suddenly a wave of bone-deep chill would wash over him, raising goosebumps despite his thick sweater. It felt concentrated, intentional. He started wearing a beanie. Indoors the nightmares began subtly. Fragmented images, endless dark corridors with walls that seemed to breathe, a low, rhythmic thrumming that vibrated in his teeth, and a profound sense of being watched from somewhere impossibly vast and profoundly other. He'd wake gasping, drenched in a cold sweat unrelated to the apartment's faulty heating, the lingering smell of decay stronger in the pre-dawn gloom. He chalked it up to stress the looming deadline for his graphic design project, the relentless city noise, the loneliness gnawing at him. Since Sarah left, the subtlety ended with the molded, started in the corner, where the wall met the ceiling above his tiny kitchen sink. Just a small, dark smudge, like spilled coffee. Ben, perpetually behind on chores, ignored it. Within 2 days, it had spread, not in random patches, but in distinct, intricate patterns, swirling geometric designs that seemed too precise, too deliberate, etched in a deep, iridescent black that shimmered with hints of unnatural green and purple when caught by the weak overhead light. Touching it felt like pressing his finger against ice wrapped in velvet, and a faint, greasy residue clung to his skin. It smelled like the decay from his nightmares. Intensified 100-fold, he scrubbed. He bleached. He scraped. The mold returned overnight, larger. The patterns more complex, spiraling across the ceiling like some blasphemous constellation. The cold spots intensified, coalescing around the mold. The smell became a physical presence, thick and cloying, making his eyes water. Sleep became impossible. The nightmares bled into waking hours, fleeting glimpses of impossible angles in the periphery of his vision. The thrumming sound echoing faintly beneath the city's din. A constant, oppressive sense of being studied by something vast and indifferent research, fueled by caffeine and terror, led him down dark digital rabbit holes. He found fragmented accounts, obscure forum posts, deleted moments after he read them, mentions of an entity referred to only as the patient watcher, or the mold that dreams. Whispers spoke of an ancient presence, older than recorded time, not malevolent in the human sense, but utterly alien. It wasn't evil, it was indifferent, a cosmic force that seeped through cracks in reality, observing, testing, infesting. Its manifestations were subtle invasions, cold spots, impossible geometry, patterns that warped perception. And always, always, the mold, a physical echo of its incomprehensible form. The accounts all ended abruptly, or didn't he end at all, simply stopping mid-sentence one sleepless night. The thrumming escalated. It wasn't he just in his head anymore. It vibrated the floorboards, rattled the cheap glass in his cupboard. The apartment felt smaller, the walls subtly leaning inwards, their angles wrong. The mold now covered most of the ceiling, its patterns shifting minutely if he stared too long, forming shapes that hinted at impossible dimensions, at eyes that weren't eyes. The cold was a physical weight, pressing down, making his breath plume visibly, despite the radiator's frantic efforts he tried to leave. He grabbed his keys, wallet, jacket, and flung open the apartment door. The hallway outside stretched into impossible darkness, longer and narrower than it should be. The familiar door to Mrs. Gable's apartment was gone. In its place, the wall was slick, with the same iridescent black mold, pulsing faintly. He slammed his own door shut, heart hammering against his ribs. The windows, when he tried them, were sealed shut, not locked, but fused into the frames, as if welded by an unseen force. The grimy alley view was gone, replaced by a swirling, oily blackness that seemed to absorb the streetlight glow from outside. Panic clawed at his throat. He called 911. Static. He tried Sarah's number. A voice answered, but it wasn't Sarah. It was a dry, papery whisper, layered over itself countless times, speaking words that slithered into his ear and dissolved into meaningless, terrifying noise that echoed the thrumming in his bones. He threw the phone across the room. He was trapped. The realization settled over him like the suffocating cold. This wasn't just haunting. It was an enclosure. His apartment was no longer a place. It was a specimen jar, and he was the specimen. The watcher wasn't just observing. It was experiencing him, tasting his fear, mapping his psyche through its subtle invasions. The mold wasn't just growth. It was the entity's physical tendril, anchoring itself to his reality. Warping it from within, the air grew thicker, harder to breathe, tasting of ozone and grave dirt. The thrumming deepened, resonating in his chest cavity, making his teeth ache. The mold on the ceiling began to drip. Thick, viscous droplets of iridescent black slime fell onto the linoleum floor with soft, wet plops. Where they landed, the pattern instantly spread, crawling across the floor like spilled ink. With terrifying sentience, he backed into the center of the room, the only space not yet claimed by the crawling darkness. His breath came in ragged gasps, each exhale a plume of frost in the unnatural cold. dripping intensified, forming a glistening, shifting pool that reflected the warped ceiling above. In that reflection, he saw it not a shape, not a form comprehensible to the human mind. It was a distortion, a wrongness woven into the fabric of the reflected space. It suggested vast, chitinous plates shifting over unfathomable distances, eyes like dying stars scattered across impossible angles, and a crushing sense of age and patience that dwarfed human existence into insignificance. It wasn't looking at the reflection. The reflection was merely a facet it occupied. It was looking through. This was the patient watcher, not invading, not attacking, simply being where it had decided to be. And Ben S.'s apartment, Ben himself, was now part of its chosen territory. Its observation wasn't passive. It was an act that altered reality around it. His fear, his desperation, his very molecules vibrating with terror, these were merely data points for an intellect as vast as it was incomprehensible. The dripping pool surged upwards, not like water, but like liquid shadow given form. It coalesced into a column that didn't touch the ceiling or the floor, but existed in the warped space between, shimmering with those impossible colors. The thrumming reached a crescendo, a physical pressure that threatened to shatter his bones. The cold wasn't just cold anymore. It was the absolute zero of interstellar void seeping into his world. Ben knew, with a chilling certainty that cut through his panic, that there was no escape, no heroics, no last-minute rescue. The doors and windows weren't just blocked. They were conceptually erased from this localized reality. He was inside the observation chamber now. Forever the column of shimmering darkness pulsed, tendrils of pure, freezing shadow, smelling of ancient voids and cosmic decay, detached from its formless mass. They didn't lash out. They flowed towards him, slow, inevitable, like ink dispersing in water. They touched his shoes. The cold was instant and absolute, a numbness that raced up his legs, not destroying flesh, but changing it. He felt his cells realigning, his perception stretching towards the impossible angles he'd glimpsed. He tried to scream, but his throat was already filling with the same icy, liquid shadow. His vision blurred, fracturing into kaleidoscopic shards, reflecting the shifting patterns on the walls, the ceiling, the thing before him as the darkness closed over his head, not drowning him, but integrating him. The last coherent thought flickered in Ben S.'s mind, a horrifying epiphany delivered not in words, but in the cold, patient hum resonating through his being. This isn't an invasion. It's a homecoming. This corner of existence, this is where it has always been waiting, watching, patiently. The thrumming deepened, becoming the only sound in the apartment now. The mold continued its silent, intricate spread across every surface, glowing faintly in the perpetual twilight that had replaced the outside world. In the center of the room, where Ben had stood, a new, complex pattern began to form on the floor, a pattern that vaguely, disturbingly, resembled a human figure, frozen in a silent scream, and high above, in the warped reflection on the slick, black ceiling, vast and patient and utterly unknowable. The watcher observed the integration of its newest facet, the silence broken only by the soft, eternal drip of iridescent slime onto the pattern below. The observation continued. The apartment waited. The mold grew. Story 6. The silence of Crowswood Farm settled like dust on old bones. I inherited it from Uncle Silas, a man whose letters grew increasingly frantic before he vanished last autumn. The soil remembers Liam. His last note had scrawled, "Don T, let them forget the cutting." The hunger stirs when the last sheaf stands alone. I dismissed it as the ramblings of an old man succumbing to solitude. Now, standing on the porch, overlooking the neglected wheat fields, swaying under a sickly yellow moon, I felt the first icy finger of doubt the locals in the village of Harrow, S-End, avoided me. Their greetings were curt, eyes sliding away towards the brooding line of ancient oaks bordering Sela's S-Land. Old Mrs. Gable, who ran the post office, finally muttered a warning when I bought supplies. "Mind the harvest, S-End boy. Your uncle, he knew the old ways. Didn't he always keep him proper, but he knew. The cutting S, not just superstition. It S a promise." She refused to elaborate, shooing me out with a trembling hand. The farmhouse itself was steeped in unease. The air hung thick with the cloying scent of damp earth, and something else of faint, sweet decay, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. Portraits of grim-faced ancestors stared down from the walls, their eyes seeming to track me. In the dusty study, I found Sela's S journals. Page after brittle page detailed a ritual older than the village itself. The cutting of the last sheaf. It wasn't tea, just harvest S-End. It was a binding, according to the spidery script. The final stand of wheat wasn't tea, merely grain. It was the physical manifestation of the land S spirit, a capricious entity known only as the hunger. Left uncut, it grew restless, drawing vitality from the soil, weakening livestock, and eventually turning its appetite towards the people who worked the land. But cutting it carelessly was worse. Anger it, and the consequences were final. The ritual was precise, passed down through generations of the farm S custodians. On the night of the hunter S moon, tonight the final sheaf had to be cut at the precise stroke of midnight. Not a second before, not a second after. It had to be bound with red twine, woven with strands of the cutter S own hair. Then it was to be shaped into a crude effigy, the corn bride, and burned in the heart of the harvested field. The ashes were to be scattered at the roots of the oldest oak, an offering of appeasement, a reminder of the pacte cold sweat broke on my brow. The hunter S moon, full and baleful, was already climbing. Sela's S last journal entry screamed from the page. Forgot the red twine. Used binder S cord. Mistimed the cut by minutes. Felt it shift. The bride, she looked at me. She hungered. Too late now. The roots are drinking deep. The entry ended in a jagged smear of ink panic, sharp and acrid, flooded my mouth. I hadn't even looked for the last sheaf, rushing out into the moon-drenched field. The wheat rustled with an unnerving, sentient sound, like dry bones scraping together. The air grew colder, the sweet rot stench intensifying, making my eyes water. I stumbled through the golden stalks, their edges sharp against my skin, feeling watched by 1,000 unseen eyes, focused from the dark wood's end. There it was, not just a sheaf, but a grotesque monument where the final stand should have been. The wheat had grown unnaturally tall and thick, knotted together into a crude, towering figure, 7 feet high. It stood silhouetted against the moon. It wasn't bound with red twine, but with dirty, frayed binder S cord Sela's S mistake. And it wasn't merely tied. The wheat stalks seemed fused, twisted together into something resembling a hunched, headless humanoid shape, where a head might be. The stalks ended in ragged, grasping points, like skeletal fingers reaching skyward. This was no corn bride. This was a corn golem. Sela's S error had warped the ritual. Midnight was minutes away. The journal S warnings screamed in my mind. Dawn let it stand past the hour. But the instructions were for cutting and binding the sheaf, then making the bride. This thing was already formed. How did you cut a sentient stack of grain? The moon reached its zenith. A profound silence descended, heavier than any ID ever known. The rustling ceased. The wind died. Even the crickets fell mute. The only sound was the frantic hammering of my own heart against my ribs then. The effigy moved not a sway in the wind. There was no wind. It was a subtle, internal shift. The knotted stalks at its base creaked, groaning like old timbers under strain. The grasping points at its apex slowly, deliberately, turned downwards, not towards the moon, but towards me. A deep, resonant vibration thrummed through the earth beneath my boots, traveling up my legs and into my chest, a low, guttural hum, that wasn't tea sound, but pure sensation, hunger, the stench of decay intensified, now mixed with the coppery tang of blood, and the dry, ancient smell of opened graves. The air shimmered around the effigy, distorting the moonlight, making the twisted wheat figure seem to ripple like heat haze. I saw movement within the stalks, not insects, but darker shapes, shifting, coiling, like roots made of shadow, forgetting the ritual, forgetting the knife ID brought. I acted on pure animal terror. I lunged forward, slashing wildly at the base of the monstrous sheaf. With the harvesting sickle, ID grabbed. The blade bit deep into the fused stalks. Not sap, but a thick, viscous black fluid oozed from the wound, steaming in the cold air and smelling of iron and spoiled meat. A sound like tearing canvas, magnified 100-fold, ripped through the silence. The vibration underfoot intensified into a tremor. The ground around the effigy cracked open, thin fissures spreading like black lightning across the soil. From those cracks, thin, root-like tendrils erupted, not pale and earthy, but glistening black and wet, whipping through the air like blind serpents. They lashed towards me. I scrambled back, tripping over the uneven ground. One tendril snapped past my face, leaving a streak of icy cold. Another wrapped around my ankle, its touch like frozen wire. It pulled with unnatural strength, dragging me towards the fissure. I screamed, hacking desperately at the root with the sickle. It severed with a sickening crunch, spraying more of the foul ichor. The severed end writhed on the ground before shriveling into ash, but the effigy itself was reacting. The great, headless mass shuddered. The fused stalks groaned and stretched. From the ragged top, where the grasping points were, a new horror unfolded. The stalks parted, peeling back like rotten petals, revealing not a void, but a pulsating, wet darkness shot through with threads of phosphorescent green. It wasn't T and I, but a focus, a locus of pure, ravenous emptiness. It fixed upon me. The humming intensified, vibrating my teeth, filling my skull. Images flooded my mind, unbidden, horrific. Sila's, not vanished, but absorbed. His face pressed against the inside of the fused wheat from within the effigy's core, eyes wide with eternal terror, mouth open in a silent scream as black roots burrowed into his flesh, drawing him deeper. The land itself, not just Crowswood, but stretching for miles, barren and gray. All life sucked dry into the insatiable maw beneath the fields. generations of fear, the weight of forgotten oaths, the crushing despair of knowing this horror was older than memory, and would outlast everything. The corn golem took a step, not a step of legs, but the fused mass lurched forward, tearing roots from the earth with a sound like snapping bones. The fissures widened, revealing glimpses of a churning darkness far below, filled with the same glistening black roots, and the faint, agonized echoes of countless swallowed screams, the price paid by those who failed the ritual across centuries. I ran, not towards the house, but towards the ancient oak at the field's edge, the one where the ashes were meant to be scattered. The ritual was broken, warped by Sela's mistake and my ignorance, but perhaps the place still held power. The roots lashed after me, snatching at my clothes, scoring my skin with icy burns. The humming filled the world, a physical pressure threatening to burst my eardrums. The effigy lurched again, closer, its pulsating maw radiating waves of soul deep, chill-reaching the gnarled oak, its trunk wider than I was tall. I slammed my back against its rough bark. The roots pursuing me recoiled momentarily, hissing like steam on ice as they neared the tree's shadow. Hope, desperate and thin, flickered. I fumbled in my pocket for the red twine ID belatedly found in Sela's desk, and the lock of my own hair ID cut earlier. Clutching them like talismans, the corn golem halted at the edge of the oak's shadow. It swayed, the pulsating darkness at its apex, throbbing with malevolent intensity. The tendrils writhed, probing the boundary, but not crossing. The silence returned, heavier than before, pregnant with ancient malice. The ground still vibrated, a constant reminder of the abyss beneath. Then a new sound, a whisper, dry as dead leaves, scraping against the inside of my skull. It wasn't words, but impressions, images, emotions flooding me. Offer, belong, feed, the roots join the silence. It wasn't demanding my death. It was demanding my integration, to become part of it, like Sela's. Another guardian consumed, another voice added to the chorus of torment beneath the soil, sustaining the ancient hunger for another cycle. My gaze fell to the red twine and the lock of hair in my trembling hand. The ritual demanded the sheaf be cut, bound, shaped, and burned. The sheaf was gone, replaced by this abomination. But the binding, perhaps, the binding was key. The promise, the pact with numb fingers, slick with cold sweat, and the effigy's foul ichor. I began to weave the red twine around the lock of my hair, forming a crude, knotted charm. I held it out towards the monstrosity, towards that pulsating emptiness. Take it, I croaked, my voice raw. The binding, the promise the whispering ceased. The pulsating darkness seemed to focus intensely on the small charm. The tendrils stilled. For a heartbeat, the oppressive humming lessened then. The charm was ripped from my hand by an unseen force, vanishing into the effigy, dark maw. The pulsation flared. A sickly green light, momentarily illuminating the twisted wheat stalks from within. The whispering returned, a chorus now, layered with Sela's familiar voice, laced with despair. Promised, bound, sustained for now, the corn golem, didn't he move towards me? Instead, it slowly, deliberately turned away. It lurched back towards the center of the field, towards the widening fissure. The glistening black roots snaked out, wrapping around its base, pulling it downwards, slowly, with the grinding sound of immense stones shifting. The abomination sank back into the earth, the fissures sealed with a final wet schlup, leaving only churned, dark soil where it had stood. The oppressive humming faded to a barely perceptible thrum beneath my feet. The sickly sweet decay smell lessened, replaced by the damp, clean scent of turned earth after rain. The hunter, moon, cast long, distorted shadows. The field was silent, empty. Relief washed over me, cold and sickening. I slumped against the ancient oak. Gasping then, I saw it, sprouting from the exact spot where the corn golem had sunk. A single, perfect stalk of wheat, unnaturally tall, unnaturally thick, bound around its middle with a crude band of red twine, woven with strands of dark hair, my hair. It stood alone in the harvested field, swaying gently in a non-existent breeze. The price, Wasantee death. Not tonight. The price was guardianship. The promise had been accepted, the binding made. The hunger was sated for now, but it wasn't gone. It slept, and it had claimed its new custodian. The ritual was mine now, to perform perfectly, year after year, hunter moon after hunter moon, until I inevitably made a mistake, until the red twine frayed, or the cut came a second late, until the roots grew thirsty again, until I joined Sela's. Another face pressed against the inside of the corn, bride from within the dark, feeding the ancient, patient hunger that slept beneath crowswood. Farm the thrumming underfoot was faint, constant, a heartbeat, waiting. The lone sheaf stood sentinel in the moonlight, a stark reminder. The land remembered, the pact endured, and the roots, deep beneath the fertile soil, were always, always drinking. Story 7. The silence of Heartwood Cottage wasn't peaceful. It was a held breath, a suffocating stillness that settled into Evelyn bones. The moment she turned off the engine of her ancient Volvo. She rented the place sight unseen, desperate for solitude after the jagged shards of her husband's death, a sudden heart attack. No warning, just gone. The brochure promised seclusion, ancient woodland, and restorative quiet. It hadn't mentioned the weight of it. The cottage itself was charmingly rustic, nestled deep within a fold of the Blackwood Hills. Thick, gnarled oaks pressed close, their branches scraping the slate roof like skeletal fingers. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the dense canopy, dappling the mossy ground in shifting, ephemeral patterns that felt more like fleeting glimpses than illumination. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of damp stone, wood smoke from a long-dead fire, and something else, something faintly metallic, like old blood or wet iron or Evelyn, unpacked her meager belongings, mostly books, and oversized sweaters, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. She chalked it up to grief, to the unfamiliarity, to the profound isolation. She'd chosen this place precisely because it was miles from the pitying glances and awkward condolences. Here she could be raw, unobserved. The first subtle wrongness manifested that night. She'd fallen asleep reading, the single lamp casting a warm pool of light. She awoke abruptly, hours later, to utter darkness. The lamp had switched itself off. Not a power cut. The digital clock on the ancient microwave still glowed a baleful red. She fumbled for the lamp switch, her heart thudding. Click. Nothing. She tried the overhead light. Darkness. Yet, when she checked the fuse box, a dusty affair, in the narrow hallway, everything seemed fine. She flipped the master switch off, then on. The microwave clock blinked, then resumed. The lights remained stubbornly dead. She spent the rest of the night huddled on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, watching the moon cast long, distorted shadows through the leaded windows. The silence now feeling predatory. The next day brought the stones. Evelyn ventured into the woods behind the cottage, seeking sunlight, hoping to dispel the claustrophobia. The forest floor was thick with centuries of leaf litter, spongy underfoot. She noticed them almost immediately. Smooth, dark gray stones, veined with startlingly white quartz. They were unnaturally cold to the touch, even in the weak sunlight. She pocketed one, finding its weight and coolness oddly soothing. Back at the cottage, she placed it on the windowsill above the sink that evening, preparing tea. She glanced at the sill. The stone was gone. She searched the small kitchen, baffled. It wasn't tea on the floor. Hadn't tea rolled away. It had simply vanished. Puzzled, slightly unnerved, she dismissed it until the next morning, when she found it sitting squarely in the center of her pillow, cold as ice, she threw it out the kitchen window into the dense undergrowth the following day. 3 identical stones sat in a neat triangle on her doorstep. The subtlety began to fray. Whispers started, not voices exactly, but sounds like voices buried deep within the white noise of the wind through the trees, the gurgle of the old pipes, the crackle of the fire she now kept burning constantly for light and warmth. They were indistinct, murmuring things just below comprehension, syllables that slipped away the moment she focused. They spoke of stillness, of depths, of things waiting beneath. Then came the reflections. She'd catch a flicker in the polished surface of the kettle, or the dark glass of the window at night. Not her reflection, but something behind her, or perhaps within the glass itself, a shape that was less form and more absence, a patch of deeper shadow that seemed to ripple with a slow, viscous movement. It was always gone when she turned her head, leaving only a greasy smear of dread in her stomach. The cold, intensified, localized in patches. She'd walk into the small bathroom and feel a wave of Arctic air emanating from the empty bathtub. The hearthstone before the fireplace would suddenly radiate a chill that made her teeth ache, even as flames roared above it. The stones reappeared constantly tucked into her coat pocket, balanced precariously on a book she'd just put down, lining the edge of the clawfoot tub, always cold, always with that stark white quartz veining like frozen lightning. One afternoon, seeking escape, she walked deeper into the woods than before. The sunlight vanished entirely, swallowed by the oppressive canopy. The air grew thick and still. The only sound the crunch of her own footsteps and the frantic thrumming of her pulse. She stopped, gasping, realizing the birdsong had ceased. Utter silence pressed in. Then she saw it ahead, slightly off the overgrown path, stood an oak unlike the others. Its trunk was twisted into impossible, agonized contortions, its bark wassantee brown, but a slick, bruised purple-black, like old meat. Instead of leaves, it bore clusters of those cold, gray stones, embedded directly into the pulsing, diseased wood. They pulsed with a faint, internal light, a sickly phosphorescence that seemed to absorb the surrounding dimness rather than illuminate it. The ground around its roots was bare earth, unnaturally smooth and dark, radiating cold, tendrils of white mist, smelling of ozone and decay. Coiled around its base, Evelyn stumbled backward, while rising in her throat. This wasn't nature. This was violation. This was wrong on a fundamental level. A wound in the fabric of the world. The whispers coalesced into a single, resonant thought that vibrated through her bones. Not heard, but felt. are here. We are beneath. We are the stillness. Panic, pure and primal, seized her. She fled, branches whipping at her face, roots snagging her feet. The oppressive silence broken only by her ragged gasps and the thunderous pounding of her heart. She burst into the cottage, slammed the door, locked it, dragged a heavy chair against it. She needed to leave. Now but the Volvo wouldn't he start. The engine turned over with a sickly whine, then died. Again and again. The battery light glowed a mocking red. She tried her phone. No signal. Never had been. She realized with dawning horror. The landline. Dead silence. The isolation she decraved had become her prison night fell. Thick and absolute. The fire seemed feeble, its light barely pushing back the shadows that gathered like clotting blood in the corners. The whispers returned, louder now, layered, overlapping, a sussurrating chorus of ancient hunger. They spoke of the stones, of roots that delved deep into places where time flowed differently, where light had never touched. They spoke of consuming stillness, of drawing life and warmth and movement into an eternal, silent void, huddled by the fire, clutching a poker, her eyes darting to every shifting shadow. The cold patches roamed the cottage now, drifting like ghosts. She saw the deeper darkness, more clearly a coalescence of shadow in the hallway, shaped vaguely like a hunched figure, composed of nothing but absolute negation and cold. It didn't move towards her. It simply was, and its presence was a sucking vacuum, draining the warmth, the sound, the very vitality from the air around it. The stones appeared inside the locked cottage. One materialized on the arm of her chair, frost blooming on the fabric beneath it. Another rolled out from beneath the sofa. They were multiplying, desperate, half mad with fear. Evelyn remembered the brochures mentioning an old woodsman, Mr. Hargrave, who lived a few miles away, the nearest human being. She had to try. She couldn't stay here. She waited for the gray light of pre-dawn, when the shadows felt marginally less oppressive, grabbed a heavy torch, and slipped out the back door. Leaving the chair barricade, the woods were different. The trees seemed closer, their branches lower, grasping. The path she walked only yesterday was overgrown, vanished. Every direction looked identical, shrouded in mist that clung like cobwebs. The cold was pervasive, biting through her layers. The silence was absolute, heavy as a shroud. Her torch beam cut a feeble swath, illuminating twisted roots that seemed to shift. When she wasn't looking directly at them, she walked for what felt like hours, her breath pluming white, her fingers numb. Hope dwindled with the battery in her torch. Then she saw a flicker of light ahead, warm, yellow light. A window. Relief, dizzying and potent, washed over her. She stumbled towards it, tears freezing on her cheeks. A small, tidy cabin emerged from the gloom. Smoke curled from the chimney. Salvation, she hammered on the door. Hello. Please. Help me. The door creaked open. An old man stood there, gnarled as the oaks. His face deeply lined. But his eyes, they weren't kindly. They were wide, terrified, fixed not on her, but on something behind her. He held a shotgun, trembling. Get away, he rasped, his voice raw with terror. You brought it. You woke it. Get away from here. Evelyn turned, following his gaze. There was nothing, just the mist-shrouded woods. What? Please, I need help. My car 1T start. The phone, look at yourself. He shrieked, backing into his cabin, the door beginning to close. Look at your shadow. Confused, Evelyn looked down at her feet, illuminated by the spill of light from the cabin. Her shadow stretched long and black across the frost-rimed ground. But it wasn't right. It wasn't connected to her feet. It stood a few inches away, independent, and it was too dense, too solid. It wasn't just an absence of light. It was a presence shaped like the hunched, shadowy figure she glimpsed in her hallway as she stared, frozen in horror. The shadow figure slowly turned its head towards her, where its face should have been. Two pits of absolute, lightless void gazed back the cabin door, slammed shut. Bolts scraped home. Evelyn stumbled backward, away from the cabin, away from the impossible shadow that mimicked her every flinch. The torch beam flickered wildly. The whispering surged, a triumphant, hungry chorus inside her own skull. You carry us. You feed us. Your grief called us. Your stillness is our home. She turned and ran blindly, not caring about direction, only escape. Branches tore at her clothes. Roots tripped her. She fell hard onto the frozen ground, the torch flying from her grasp, its beam guttering out against a moss-covered boulder. Darkness swallowed her, panting, sobbing. She pushed herself up. Her hands were scraped and bleeding. She looked towards where the torch had landed. Its dying beam illuminated the mossy rock and the dozens of cold, gray stones embedded within it, their white quartz veins glowing faintly in the gloom. They pulsed, slowly, rhythmically, like a slow, cold heartbeat. Her own heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic counterpoint to that glacial pulse. She tried to crawl away, but her hand landed on something smooth and impossibly cold. Another stone. It clung to her palm, its chill seeping into her skin, into her bones. She tried to fling it away, but her fingers wouldn't uncurl. They were stiff, numb, fused around the stone by the invasive cold. The whispering wasn't outside anymore. It was inside. It resonated in the marrow of her bones, in the sluggish flow of her blood. It spoke of roots spreading through her, of becoming part of the ancient stillness beneath the hills. It spoke of eternity spent in silent, frozen observation as the world above lived and died. And turned to dust, she looked back towards Heartwood Cottage, invisible in the distance and the dark. She couldn't go back. She couldn't go forward. The woods pressed in, alive with a malevolent awareness. The cold stone fused to her palm was an anchor, a brand. Escape wasn't just impossible. It was a concept that belonged to the warm, noisy world she left behind. The final, devastating truth settled over Evelyn, colder than the stone, heavier than the silence. She hadn't found solitude. She hadn't escaped her grief. She had merely carried her silent despair to a place that hungered for it. The entity wasn't just in the woods or the cottage. It was in the stones. It was in the shadows. And now, as the invasive cold crept up her arm, turning her flesh numb and leaden, she understood the most horrifying revelation of all. The stillness wasn't an external force she could flee. It was a seed her grief had planted, and it was growing inside her. The ancient, unknowable presence wasn't beneath the hills. It was beneath her skin, and it was waking up. The only escape was into the eternal, silent void. It promised a void that looked out at the world now through her own terrified, freezing eyes. She sat in the freezing dark, fused to the stone, listening to the slow, glacial pulse of the earth beneath her, a pulse that now echoed perfectly in the icy stillness of her own slowing heart. The woods watched and waited. Story 8. The silence of the house wasn't peaceful. It was a heavy, listening thing. Alina felt it press against her eardrums the moment she turned the key in the lock. Stepping into the stale air of the home she shared with Martin. 3 months since the aneurysm stole him mid-sentence over breakfast. 3 months of echoing footsteps and the phantom scent of his pipe tobacco that vanished when she turned her head tonight. The silence felt different, thicker, charged. She moved through the familiar gloom. The streetlights outside, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe across the faded Persian rug. Her hand brushed the cold marble of the hallway table, sending a jolt up her arm. Too cold. The heating was on. Yet a pocket of frigid air clung to the space near the stairs. She shivered, pulling her cardigan tighter. The worn wool scratchy against her neck, the usual scent of dust and old wood was laced with something new, something damp and organic, like earth after a long rain, or something freshly turned oversleep was a futile hope. Elinor settled into Martin S. armchair, her armchair now, though it still held the imprint of his broad shoulders, with a lukewarm mug of chamomile tea. The steam curled lazily, barely visible in the dim light from the single lamp she'd left on. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall was unnaturally loud, each talk landing like a pebble dropped into the oppressive silence that when she saw it, a flicker in the dark archway leading to the dining room. Not a shape exactly, more an absence of light, a deeper patch of shadow that seemed to ripple for a fraction of a second. Her breath hitched. Martin. The name escaped her lips, a desperate whisper. Ridiculous. Yet the hope, sharp and painful, pricked her chest. Silence answered. Then a sound. Not a sound she heard with her ears, but one she felt. A low, resonant thrum, vibrating up through the soles of her slippers, into her bones. It pulsed once, deep and unsettling, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Then it was gone. The silence rushed back, heavier than before. The next few days were a slow descent into a waking nightmare. The cold spots multiplied, shifting locations like predatory animals testing her boundaries. One moment, the kitchen sink would feel like ice under her fingers. The next, a wave of chill would wash over her as she passed the bookcase in the living room. The damp, earthy smell intensified, becoming cloying, making her gag. It clung to her clothes. Her hair sleep became impossible. Every creak of the old house, every sigh of the wind outside was amplified, twisted into potential threat. She'd lie rigid in bed, blankets pulled to her chin, straining her ears. Sometimes, in the absolute dark, she'd sense a presence hovering just beyond the edge of her vision, a pressure against her personal space. She'd swear she could feel breath, cold and odorless, stirring the fine hairs on her neck. But when she whipped her head around, gasping, there was nothing, only the suffocating dark and the frantic hammering of her own heart. The whispers started subtly. At first, she dismissed them as the wind whistling down the chimney or the groan of settling pipes. Then one night, as she stood washing dishes, the water suddenly turned icy, shocking her, and beneath the rush of the tap, she heard it. A sibilant sigh, almost a word. Elinor, she dropped the plate. It shattered on the linoleum. A jagged explosion of sound that made her scream. Her reflection in the dark kitchen window startled her wide, terrified eyes, face pale as parchment. But was it just her? For a split second, superimposed over her own panicked image, she thought she saw another face. gaunt, hollow-eyed, a rictus of sorrow. Martin. Her heart clenched, but when she blinked, it was just her own frightened reflection staring back the line between exhaustion and hallucination blurred. She stopped eating properly. The silence became a physical weight on her chest. She avoided mirrors. They felt treacherous. One afternoon, seeking solace in the garden, the weak autumn sun warm on her face, she saw Mrs. Henderson from next door watching her over the fence. The old woman-s expression, wasn't one of neighborly concern. It was pure, unadulterated fear. Her wrinkled face was ashen, her knuckles white where they gripped the fence palings. When a leaner met her gaze, Mrs. Henderson flinched violently, turned, and scurried back into her house as if fleeing a rabid dog. The slam of her door echoed in the still air. That reaction, so visceral and unexplained, planted a seed of profound dread deeper than any cold spot or whisper. What did Mrs. Henderson see? What was wrong with her? The breaking point came on the anniversary of Martin's death. A raw, windy night. The power flickered, then died, plunging the house into absolute darkness. Eleanor fumbled for candles, her hands trembling violently. The flame of the first match guttered out in a sudden, inexplicable draft. The second caught, illuminating a small circle around her. The dancing light made the shadows leap and writhe on the walls. Giving them malicious life, she made her way to the living room. The candle casting monstrous, shifting shapes. She sank into the armchair, the worn fabric offering no comfort. The silence was absolute now, without the hum of appliances. The cold pressed in from all sides, sharp and invasive, and the smell, it was overwhelming now. Wet soil, decay, the cloying sweetness of rot then. The whispers coalesced, not from one direction, but from everywhere, vibrating through the floorboards, the walls, the very air she breathed. A chorus of sibilant voices, layered and overlapping, impossible to decipher, yet carrying an unbearable weight of grief and accusation. Why left me so cold, Eleanor? Tears streamed down her face, hot against her icy skin. Martin, she sobbed, the word tearing from her throat. Is it you? Are you punishing me? I am sorry. I am so sorry. I wasn't there. The candle flame dipped violently, then flared, casting grotesque, elongated shadows that seemed to reach for her. The whispers intensified, becoming a sussurrating roar inside her skull, and then, cutting through the cacophony, a single voice, clearer than the others, chillingly familiar yet distorted by an impossible distance and an unfathomable cold, punishing you. The voice held no warmth, only a terrible, hollow emptiness. Look, Alina. Look and remember the candlelight seemed to gather, focusing on the large, gilt-framed mirror above the fireplace, the one she'd been avoiding, compelled by a force beyond terror. Alina raised her eyes the reflection. Wasn't tea, hers not. Entirely the figure in the mirror stood where she sat, in Martin S. armchair, but it wore a mud-stained suit, the suit Martin had been buried in. The fabric was torn, dark earth clinging to the lapels. The face it was Martin S. face, but sunken waxen, the skin gray and taut over the skull. Mud caked his hair, filled his nostrils. His eyes were open, milky and unseeing. Yet they seemed fixed on her reflection with an unbearable intensity. His lips, cracked and dirt-encrusted, moved silently and, standing behind the chair, reflected in the mirror, but unseen in the room itself, was her reflection as she knew it exhausted, tear-streaked, wearing her favorite blue cardigan, but her hands, they were resting on Martin S. shoulders in the reflection, and they weren't tea clean. They were dark, stained a deep, unnatural brown that looked black in the candlelight. Dirt, or something else. Dried, flaking mud clung beneath her fingernails, the reflection of her leaned down, her lips almost touching the ear of the corpse in the chair. The Alina in the mirror smiled a small, secretive, utterly terrifying smile. Then the mirror her whispered something, her stained fingers tightening possessively on Martin S. shoulders. The voice in the room, Martin S. voice, devoid of life, echoed the words, "Remember what you did, my love." In the garden, when the ground was soft, the candle snuffed out. Absolute, suffocating darkness, the silence roared. Alina sat frozen in the armchair, the image seared onto her retinas. Her own reflection, smiling over Martin S. corpse, her hands stained with earth. The damp, decaying smell filled her nostrils, thick and cloying. The cold pressed in, final and absolute. Remember what you did. The words echoed in the void inside her skull. Fragmented images flashed the garden shed, the sharp edge of the shovel catching the moonlight, the frantic digging, the terrible, muffled thud as something heavy hit the bottom of the hole, the frantic scraping of soil to cover it, memories she'd buried deeper than any grave, surfacing now with horrifying clarity, not grief-induced hallucinations, actions. A low, resonant thrum vibrated through the floorboards again. Stronger this time, it pulsed against her feet, up her legs. A deep, subterranean heartbeat. Was it the earth itself, or something pleased in the perfect, consuming blackness? Alina felt unseen eyes upon her, felt the weight of the turned earth outside, felt the phantom grit of soil beneath her own fingernails, and she knew, with a certainty colder than the grave, that the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting, it was remembering, and it was inside the house with her, always. The revelation wasn't just about Martin. It was about the monster she saw smiling in the mirror, the one she always carried inside. The digging wasn't over. The ground, inside and out, was never truly still.